The morning sun of Centauri Prime cast long shadows across the Galactic Military Academy as Jake Morrison walked through the massive stone corridors. His human boots made soft sounds against the polished floor while alien students moved around him in their own unique ways. Some floated, others slithered, and a few moved on mechanical legs that clicked with each step. Jake had been at the academy for 8 months now, and still felt like an outsider. The other students were bigger, stronger, or had natural abilities that humans could only dream of. The reptilian students could see heat signatures without any equipment. The Voidborn could survive in space without suits. The synthetics never got tired or needed sleep. Jake was just human. Dr. Zephyrian Colfax stood at the front of the weapons theory classroom when Jake entered. The professor was over 9 feet, tall with skin that looked like living crystal. Blue light moved under his transparent skin in patterns that showed his mood. Right now, the patterns were moving slowly, which meant he was calm but serious. "Take your seats quickly," the professor said in his deep voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Today we begin your final project." Jake sat in his usual spot near the back. His desk was smaller than the others because humans were among the smallest species in the known galaxy. Around him sat his classmates. Veltar the reptilian had scales that changed color with his emotions. Luna was a synthetic with glowing blue eyes that never blinked. Kreese was another human, but she studied in the medical program and rarely talked to Jake. The professor moved to the center of the room. His crystal skin began to glow brighter as he spoke. "For 300 years I have taught weapons theory at this academy. I have seen plasma cannons that can melt entire cities. I have watched gravity bombs tear apart moons. I have studied bioweapons that could end all life on a planet." The students leaned forward in their seats. This was why they came to the academy. They wanted to build the next great weapon that would change how wars were fought across the galaxy. "But the professor continued, "I have never seen a truly new idea. Every weapon is just a bigger version of something that came before. Bigger explosions, more energy, faster speed. This is not innovation. This is just making things larger." Jake noticed that some students looked confused. The reptilian students flicked their tongues nervously. The synthetics made quiet clicking sounds as they processed this information. "Your assignment is this," Dr. Colfax said as holographic displays appeared above each desk. "Design and build a completely new weapon. Not bigger, not faster, not more powerful. New, something that has never existed before in galactic warfare." The classroom erupted in excited chatter. Students immediately began talking about their ideas. Veltar spoke about using his species' venom in new ways. Luna discussed electromagnetic pulses that could shut down entire star systems. A student from the gas giant Nexus talked about weapons that could control weather patterns. Jake sat quietly and listened. All of their ideas sounded impressive, but they were still just variations of existing weapons. Poison was poison whether it came from a snake or a laboratory. An electromagnetic pulse was still just electricity whether it came from a small device or a giant machine. "You have 6 weeks, the professor announced over the noise. "At the end of that time, you will demonstrate your creation to a panel of military observers from across the galaxy. The student with the most innovative design will receive the Golden Circuit Award and a position with any military force they choose." After class, Jake walked slowly to the academy library. It was a massive building with information from thousands of worlds. Most students went straight to the weapons sections, but Jake had always been drawn to the history areas. He found a quiet corner and began reading about human military history. Other species often laughed at human weapons. Humans threw rocks and sharp sticks, while other species had energy beams and plasma cannons. But Jake noticed something interesting in the old Earth records. Humans had always been good at making one thing do many jobs. A knife could cut food, defend against enemies, or help build shelter. A stick could be a walking aid, a weapon, or a tool for digging. Even in modern times, human soldiers carried equipment that served multiple purposes. Other species seemed to specialize. Reptilians were hunters, so they built hunting weapons. Synthetics were builders, so they made construction tools. The gas giant dwellers were explorers, so they created scanning equipment. But humans had always been survivors, and survivors needed tools that could adapt. Jake spent the rest of the day reading about adaptation and versatility. He learned about ancient human tools that could transform for different uses. He read about survival techniques that required making the most of limited resources. The more he read, the more an idea began to form in his mind. That evening, Jake sat in his small dormitory room and stared out the window at the alien stars. His roommate was a synthetic named Circuit, who spent most of his time in sleep mode, so Jake had plenty of quiet time to think. What if the problem wasn't that weapons needed to be bigger or more powerful? What if the problem was that weapons could only do one thing? A plasma cannon could only shoot plasma. A gravity bomb could only create gravity wells. A bioweapon could only release toxins. But what if someone built something that could do all of these things and more? What if adaptation and versatility were more important than raw power? Jake pulled out his notebook and began sketching. He drew simple diagrams of devices that could change shape and function. He wrote notes about materials that could reorganize themselves. He made lists of all the different tools and weapons that soldiers needed during combat and support operations. By morning, Jake had filled 30 pages with ideas. His concept was simple but revolutionary. Instead of building a new weapon, he would build a new kind of tool. A device that could become whatever the situation required. He knew his classmates would think he was crazy. They were designing planet killers and star destroyers while he was thinking about utility knives. But Jake had learned something important from human history. The most successful tools were not the most powerful ones. They were the ones that people could use in the most situations. As the first sun of Centauri Prime rose outside his window, Jake Morrison began to design something that would change warfare forever. He just did not know it yet. 2 weeks had passed since Professor Colfax gave the assignment, and the academy buzzed with activity. Students worked day and night in the engineering labs, building prototypes of their new weapons. The sound of welding torches, energy hammers, and molecular printers filled the corridors at all hours. Jake spent most of his time in the library while his classmates built their devices. Every day he watched them carry pieces of their projects through the halls. Veltar had constructed something that looked like a giant serpent made of metal and glass. Luna was building a device covered in spinning electromagnetic coils that hummed with electricity. The other students had massive weapons that required hovercarts to move. "Morrison, what are you doing?" asked Dr. Helen Carter during their weekly video call from Earth. She was Jake's former professor and had recommended him for the exchange program. Her gray hair was tied back as always, and her kind eyes showed concern through the holographic display. "I am researching," Jake replied from his small dormitory room. Circuit was in sleep mode in the corner, his blue lights dim and his mechanical breathing quiet. The other human students are sending reports about massive projects. Plasma cannons that can punch through battle cruisers, gravity weapons that can crush entire formations of enemy ships. "What are you building?" Jake held up his notebook filled with sketches and diagrams. "I'm not building a weapon, Dr. Carter. I am building something different." She leaned forward in her chair back on Earth. "Different how?" "Everyone here thinks the same way," Jake explained. "They see a problem and they build a bigger solution. Enemy has strong armor. Build a stronger gun. Enemy has a big ship. Build a bigger bomb. But that is not how humans survived on Earth." Dr. Carter smiled. She had taught Jake about human engineering principles and was curious to see how he would apply them. "Go on. Humans survived because we adapted," Jake continued. "When we needed to hunt, our spears became hunting tools. When we needed to defend ourselves, the same spears became weapons. When we needed to build shelters, we used the spear shafts as support beams. One tool, many uses. And you think this applies to galactic warfare?" Jake turned his notebook to show her his latest sketches. The drawings showed a simple cylindrical device with various attachments and configurations. What if instead of building one perfect weapon, we built one perfect tool? Something that could become any weapon or device that a soldier needed. Dr. Carter studied the drawings through the holographic connection. The engineering challenges would be enormous. You would need materials that could reshape themselves, power systems that could adapt to different functions, control systems that could interface with multiple species. I know, Jake said. But humans have always been good at solving problems with limited resources. Every other species here has natural advantages. Reptilians are natural hunters, synthetics are natural builders, voidborn are natural survivors in space. But humans are natural problem solvers. After ending the call, Jake returned to his research. He spent hours reading about nanotechnology, adaptive materials, and multifunction device design. The Academy Library had information from thousands of worlds, and Jake absorbed it all. He learned about voidborn, biometal that could change shape when exposed to different energy frequencies. He read about synthetic nanocircuits that could reorganize themselves to perform different calculations. He studied reptilian bioengineering techniques that allowed living tissue to adapt to different environments. The more Jake learned, the more excited he became about his idea. Other species had developed amazing technologies, but they always used them for specialized purposes. The Voidborn used their biometal for ship hulls that could repair themselves. The synthetics used their nanocircuits for better computing systems. The reptilians used their bioengineering for medical applications. But what if someone combined all of these technologies into one adaptive system? Jake began making trips to the engineering labs late at night when most students were asleep. He did not want to build his device where others could see it. The labs were equipped with fabrication systems that could work with materials from any known species in the galaxy. His first attempts were failures. The biometal would change shape but could not hold complex forms. The nanocircuits could reorganize but used too much power. The bioengineering components worked well, but were too slow to adapt in combat situations. Jake persisted. He remembered what Dr. Carter had taught him about human engineering. Start simple, test everything, learn from failures, and keep improving. Other species often tried to build perfect systems on the first attempt. Humans built systems that worked, and then made them better. One night, Chris found him in the lab. She was the other human in his class, but studied medical applications instead of weapons. Her blonde hair was messy from working late on her own project. "Jake? What are you doing here so late?" she asked. Jake looked up from his workbench where components were scattered across the surface. "Working on my project. What about you?" "I forgot some medical scanner parts in here earlier," she said, then noticed his work. "What is that thing?" Jake held up a metal cylinder about the size of his forearm. It looked simple compared to the massive weapons his classmates were building. "It is my submission for the weapons project," Chris laughed. "That tiny thing?" Veltar-S. "Weapon is the size of a small building. Luna's device needs its own power generator. How is that little cylinder supposed to compete?" "Watch," Jake said. He activated the device and it began to glow softly. The metal surface rippled like water, and then extended into a long rod with a sharp point. Spear configuration for close combat. Chris stopped laughing. Jake pressed another control and the device flowed back into cylinder form, then expanded into a flat disc. Shield configuration for defense. Another change and it became a complex scanning device with multiple sensors. Medical scanner for field treatment. How is this possible? Chris whispered. "Adaptive nanotechnology," Jake explained. "The core contains programmable matter that can reorganize itself based on the situation. The control system scans the environment and suggests the best configuration. The power source adapts its output to match the current function." Chris picked up the device when Jake handed it to her. It was lighter than she expected and warm to the touch. "This is incredible. Why are you keeping it secret?" "Because everyone expects weapons to be big and complicated," Jake said. "They think more complex means more effective. But humans learned long ago that the best tools are simple ones that can do many jobs well." Over the following weeks, Chris helped Jake refine his design. Her medical training helped him improve the scanning and treatment functions. She also helped him test the device's ability to interface with different species' biology and neural patterns. "You realize what this means, don't you?" Kreese said one evening as they worked together in the lab. "What do you mean?" "This does not just replace one weapon," she explained. "This replaces entire equipment loadouts. A soldier carrying this would not need a rifle, a scanner, a medical kit, an engineering tool, or any other specialized equipment. Everything would be in one device." Jake had been so focused on the technical challenges that he had not fully considered the implications. His simple tool could revolutionize how military forces operated. Instead of soldiers carrying dozens of different devices, they could carry one that became whatever they needed. As the 6-week deadline approached, Jake felt ready. His device could transform into over 50 different configurations, ranging from weapons to medical tools to engineering equipment. It was powered by a miniaturized fusion cell that could run for months without recharging. The control interface could adapt to any known species' neural patterns and physical requirements. Most importantly, it was simple. While his classmates had built complex machines that required teams to operate and maintain, Jake had built something that one person could carry and use effectively. On the night before the demonstrations, Jake sat in his room holding his creation. It looked so ordinary compared to the massive weapons his classmates had built. He wondered if the judges would even take it seriously, but then he remembered something Dr. Carter had told him before he left Earth. The best solutions often look too simple to be effective. That is why they work when complicated solutions fail. Tomorrow, Jake would find out if she was right. Jake stood in his private testing chamber deep beneath the academy grounds. The room was soundproof and shielded from all forms of scanning, which made it perfect for secret prototype testing. His device lay on the metal table before him, looking humble compared to the massive weapons his classmates had built. The testing chamber was designed for dangerous weapons experiments, with blast-proof walls and emergency containment systems. Other students had already damaged several testing rooms with their prototypes. Veltar had melted through a wall with his bioweapon. Luna's electromagnetic device had disabled the power grid for an entire wing of the academy. Jake picked up his creation and felt its familiar weight in his hands. After weeks of refinement, the device had become an extension of his thoughts. The neural interface had learned his brain patterns and could anticipate what configuration he needed before. He consciously decided. "Test sequence 1, Jake said aloud, activating the recording system. "Close combat configuration." The cylinder in his hands began to shift and flow like liquid metal. Within seconds, it had extended into a 3-foot staff with a sharp spear point at one end and a weighted club at the other. The surface was covered in microscopic sensors that could detect approaching threats and adjust the weapons. Balance automatically. Jake moved through a series of combat forms, thrusting and parrying against imaginary opponents. The weapon felt natural in his hands, adapting its weight distribution as he moved. When he spun it overhead, it became lighter for speed. When he thrust forward, it became denser for impact. "Test sequence 2, he continued. "Ranged combat configuration." The staff flowed back into cylinder form, then extended and reshaped itself into what looked like a rifle. But this was no ordinary energy weapon. The device could fire plasma bolts, electromagnetic pulses, or solid projectiles depending on the target and situation. The targeting system linked directly to Jake's nervous system. Making aiming as natural as pointing his finger, Jake fired several shots at the testing chamber's target dummies. Each shot was perfectly placed despite the different ammunition types. The device automatically selected the best projectile for each target material and adjusted its power output accordingly. "Test sequence 3, he said. "Defensive configuration." Again, the device flowed and changed, this time expanding into a large disc that Jake could hold as a shield. But this shield did more than just block attacks. It could absorb energy from incoming weapons and use that power to strengthen itself or charge its own systems. The surface could also project a force. field that extended the protective area. Jake activated the chamber's attack simulation system. Energy bolts and projectiles fired at him from multiple directions. His shield caught every attack, growing brighter as it absorbed the energy. When the simulation ended, his device had actually gained power instead of losing it, but the real innovation came with the next series of tests. Jake demonstrated configurations that no one would expect from a weapon. The device became a medical scanner that could diagnose injuries and diseases in any known species. It transformed into surgical tools for emergency field treatment. It reconfigured as communication equipment that could contact ships in orbit or send messages across the galaxy. Test Sequence 7, Jake announced. Engineering configuration? The device became a plasma cutter for breaching operations, then flowed into a welding torch for repairs. It could serve as a power source for other equipment or become a sophisticated computer for tactical calculations. Jake watched with satisfaction as his creation solved problem after problem with elegant simplicity. The most impressive demonstration came when Jake tested the device's adaptive intelligence. He placed it on the table and stepped back. Autonomous. Defense mode, he commanded. The device scanned the room, identified potential threats, and configured itself accordingly. When Jake approached slowly, it remained in standby mode. When he moved quickly or aggressively, it activated defensive systems. When he threw objects at it, the device transformed into appropriate defensive configurations without any conscious command from Jake. "This is incredible," said a voice from the doorway. Jake spun around to see Lisa Park standing in the entrance to the testing chamber. She was a fellow human student who studied xenobiology in the medical program. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her eyes were wide with amazement. "Lisa? How did you get in here?" Jake asked. "I followed the energy readings," she explained, entering the chamber. "My bioscanners detected some unusual signatures coming from this direction. I thought there might be a malfunction in the building systems." Jake quickly picked up his device, which had automatically configured itself into standby mode when it detected the new person. "You cannot tell anyone about this? Tell anyone about what?" Lisa moved closer, her scientist's curiosity obvious. "Jake, what is that thing?" Jake hesitated, then decided to trust her. Lisa was brilliant, and her xenobiology expertise could help him solve some remaining problems with the device's biocompatibility systems. "It is my submission for the weapons project," he said. Lisa laughed. "That little thing?" "Jake, I have seen some of the other projects. Veltar's bioweapon could wipe out entire cities. Luna's electromagnetic device could disable a fleet of starships. How is that tiny cylinder supposed to compete?" Instead of explaining, Jake demonstrated. He ran through a series of configurations, showing Lisa how the device could transform into dozens of different tools and weapons. With each transformation, her expression grew more amazed. "And the nanotechnology alone must be worth a fortune," she whispered. "But how did you solve the biocompatibility problem? Different species have completely different neural patterns and biochemistry." "That is where I need your help," Jake admitted. "The device can interface with human biology perfectly, but I am not sure how well it will work with other species." Lisa's eyes lit up. This was exactly the kind of challenge she loved. "Show me the biointerface systems." For the next several hours, Lisa helped Jake refine the device's ability to work with different alien biologies. Her knowledge of xenobiology was exactly what Jake needed to make his creation truly universal. "The reptilian nervous system operates on different electrical frequencies," she explained as they worked. "You will need to adjust the neural interface to accommodate their unique brain chemistry." "What about the synthetics?" Jake asked. "They do not have biological nervous systems at all. They use quantum processing networks," Lisa replied. "The device will need to communicate through quantum entanglement rather than electrical impulses." Together, they modified Jake's creation to work with every known species in the galaxy. The biocompatibility systems became almost as sophisticated as the transformation technology itself. "Jake, do you realize what you have built here?" Lisa asked as they finished their work. This is not just a weapon. This is a complete revolution in personal equipment. What do you mean? Lisa picked up the device, which had learned her biosignatures and was now compatible with her neural patterns. A soldier carrying this would not need any other equipment. No separate weapons, no medical kits, no communication devices, no engineering tools. Everything would be in one package. Jake had been so focused on the technical aspects that he had not fully considered the practical implications. His device could eliminate the need for soldiers to carry dozens of different tools and weapons. Supply chains could be simplified. Training could be standardized. Maintenance would become much easier, but there is more, Lisa continued. This technology could be used for civilian applications too. Explorers, researchers, emergency responders, construction workers. Anyone who needs versatile tools could benefit from this. As the demonstration day approached, Jake felt confident in his creation but nervous about the presentation. His device looked so simple compared to the massive weapons his classmates had built. He worried that the judges would not take it seriously. Remember, Lisa told him the night before the demonstrations, the best ideas often look too simple to be revolutionary. That is what makes them work when complicated solutions fail. Jake spent the final evening running through his presentation plan. He would start with basic configurations to show the device's versatility, then demonstrate its adaptive intelligence and biocompatibility features. Finally, he would explain how his creation could change the nature of warfare itself. His device sat on his desk in standby mode, its surface showing gentle patterns of light that indicated it was ready for action. Tomorrow, Jake would find out if his human approach to the problem would impress judges who expected bigger and more destructive weapons. As he prepared for sleep, Jake thought about Dr. Carter's lessons on human engineering principles. Humans had always succeeded by making tools that could adapt to different situations. Now he would see if that same philosophy could revolutionize galactic warfare. The device seemed to sense his thoughts and pulsed once with warm light, as if it was reassuring him that they were ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. The grand demonstration hall of the Galactic Military Academy buzzed with excitement as students prepared to present their final projects. The massive circular chamber could hold over 1,000 observers and was designed to showcase the most advanced military technology in the galaxy. Today, representatives from dozens of species had come to see what the next generation of weapons designers had created. Jake sat in the student section, holding his device in a simple carrying case. Around him, his classmates supervised the installation of their massive weapons systems. Veltar's bioweapon required a containment unit the size of a small building. Luna's electromagnetic device needed its own power generator that filled half the demonstration floor. Other students had weapons that required hover lifts and technical teams just to move into position. Professor Colfax stood at the center of the hall, his crystalline skin glowing with patterns that showed he was pleased with the turnout. Military commanders from the Reptilian Alliance, the Synthetic Collective, the Voidborn Empire, and dozens of other civilizations sat in the observation galleries. Some wore uniforms covered in medals and honors. Others were beings of pure energy, or mechanical constructs that represented their species' military leadership. Today we witness the future of galactic warfare, the professor announced, his voice carrying clearly through the hall's acoustic systems. These students have worked for 6 weeks to create weapons that have never existed before. Each presentation will be evaluated on innovation, effectiveness, and potential military application. Jake watched as the first student began his demonstration. It was a member of the rock-like granite species who had built what he called a planetary siege cannon. The weapon was enormous, requiring a platform the size of a city block. When activated, it fired a beam of concentrated gravitational energy that could crack the surface of a small moon. The military observers murmured appreciatively as chunks of artificial asteroid were reduced to dust in seconds. The weapon was undeniably powerful and would be devastating in siege warfare. But Jake noticed that it took 15 minutes to charge between shots and required a crew of 50 specialists to operate. Next came Veltar with his bioweapon, the Reptilian student had engineered a viral agent that could adapt to different species, biology, and cause rapid cellular breakdown. His demonstration showed how the weapon could be configured to target specific genetic markers, making it possible to eliminate enemy populations while leaving allies unharmed. The presentation was impressive and terrifying in equal measure. Several military observers took detailed notes about potential applications, but Jake saw that the bioweapon required elaborate containment systems and could not be used in areas where friendly forces might be exposed. Luna's electromagnetic pulse device came next. The synthetic student had created a weapon that could disable electronic systems across an entire star system. Her demonstration showed how the device could shut down enemy ships, communications, and even artificial intelligence networks from thousands of miles away. The military representatives were clearly impressed by the scope and power of Luna's creation. But Jake noticed that the weapon was so powerful it would also disable friendly systems in the same area. It was a weapon of last resort that could only be used when no allies were present. Student after student presented weapons of incredible, destructive power. There were gravity bombs that could collapse stars, nano-weapon swarms that could consume entire fleets, and energy weapons that could burn through any known armor. Each demonstration was more spectacular than the last. Finally, Professor Colfax called Jake's name. Jake Morrison, representing Earth and the Human Colonial Defense Force. Jake walked to the center of the demonstration floor carrying only his small case. The contrast with previous presentations was obvious and embarrassing. Where other students had needed teams of technicians and massive equipment, Jake stood alone with a container no larger than a briefcase. Whispers and chuckles came from some sections of the audience. Jake heard comments about primitive human technology and simple Earth weapons. Some of the military observers looked ready to dismiss his presentation before it began. Jake opened his case and removed his device. In the enormous demonstration hall, the simple metal cylinder looked pathetically small. More laughter came from the student section. Even some of the military observers seemed to lose interest. Honored judges and fellow students, Jake began, his voice steady despite his nervousness. My creation is called the Adaptive Combat Utility Device. Unlike the weapons you have seen today, it was not designed to be bigger or more destructive than existing systems. He held up the cylinder for everyone to see. It was designed to be smarter. Jake activated the device and it began its first transformation. The metal flowed like liquid and extended into a long-range precision rifle. Standard infantry weapon configuration for engaging targets at distance. He fired several shots at targets on the far side of the hall. Each shot hit exactly where he aimed, despite the considerable distance and the fact that he was using equipment no one had seen before. But then Jake did something unexpected. Instead of stopping to explain the weapon, he immediately triggered another transformation. The rifle flowed back into cylinder form and then expanded into a large shield just as return fire came from the automated defense systems built into the hall's walls. Defensive configuration for protection against counterattack, Jake announced as energy bolts struck his shield and were absorbed harmlessly. The audience had stopped laughing. Military observers leaned forward in their seats. As they realized they were seeing something genuinely new, Jake continued his demonstration without pause. The shield became a medical scanner that he used to examine a volunteer from the audience. Field medical configuration for treating wounded personnel. The scanner became surgical tools that could perform emergency operations. Emergency surgery. Configuration for battlefield conditions. The transformations came faster now as Jake showed the device's incredible versatility. It became a communication array that contacted ships in orbit around the planet. It reconfigured as engineering. Tools that could cut through armor, weld metal, or generate power for other equipment. It transformed into scanning devices that could detect enemies, analyze materials, or map unknown terrain. The device contains over 50 different configurations, Jake explained as he demonstrated each one. It can serve as weapons, medical equipment, engineering tools, communication systems, scanning devices, and emergency equipment. The adaptive AI learns from each use and can suggest the best configuration for any situation. But the most impressive part of Jake's demonstration came when he activated the device's autonomous mode. He placed the cylinder on the floor and stepped back. "Threat assessment and autonomous response mode," he announced. The device scanned the entire hall, identifying potential dangers and opportunities. When Jake moved toward it slowly, it remained in standby. When he approached aggressively, it configured itself for defense. When he threw objects at it, the device transformed to intercept each projectile with the appropriate response. The biocompatibility systems allow the device to interface with any known species, Jake continued. He gestured to Lisa Park, who had volunteered to help with his demonstration. She picked up the device and it immediately adapted to her different neural patterns and physical requirements. The hall was completely silent now. Military observers were taking detailed notes and speaking urgently into communication devices. Professor Colfex's crystalline skin showed patterns that Jake had never seen before, indicating deep surprise and excitement. "The implications are significant," Jake said, addressing the military representatives directly. "A soldier equipped with this device would not need to carry separate weapons, medical kits, communication equipment, engineering tools, or scanning devices. Everything would be contained in one adaptable system." He paused to let this sink in. Supply chains would be simplified. Training would be standardized. Maintenance would be easier. Most importantly, soldiers would have exactly the right tool for every situation instead of having to make do with whatever equipment they happen to be carrying. Jake retrieved his device from Lisa and held it up for everyone to see. "This is not just a new weapon. It is a new approach to military equipment design. Instead of building bigger and more specialized tools, we build smarter and more adaptable ones." The demonstration hall erupted in discussion as Jake returned to his seat. Military observers were already requesting private meetings. His fellow students looked at him with new respect and more than a little envy. Professor Colfax called for order as the judging panel prepared to deliberate. But Jake could see from the expressions around the hall that his presentation had changed everything. The simple human approach to the problem had accomplished what none of the more impressive weapons could manage. It had made everyone rethink what they thought they knew about military technology. As Jake sat waiting for the judge's decision, he thought about Dr. Carter's words about human engineering principles. Sometimes the most revolutionary ideas were the ones that looked too simple to work. Today, he had proven that sometimes simple was exactly what the galaxy needed. The judging panel had been deliberating for 3 hours when Professor Colfax finally returned to the demonstration hall. His crystalline skin showed patterns that Jake had learned indicated deep thought and significant decisions. The military observers had not left their seats, continuing to discuss Jake's presentation in hushed but excited tones. "After extensive discussion and evaluation," the professor announced, "the judging panel has reached a unanimous decision." Jake felt his heart racing as he sat with his device in his lap. Around him, his classmates waited nervously for the results. Valtare's scales had turned the dark green color that showed anxiety. Luna's optical sensors were focused intently on the professor. The other students showed their own species signs of nervousness and anticipation. The Golden Circuit Award for the most innovative military technology goes to Jake Morrison of Earth for his adaptive combat utility device. The hall erupted in applause, but Jake barely heard it. He was too stunned to fully process what had happened. His simple tool had beaten weapons that could destroy planets and disable entire fleets, but Professor Colfax was not finished. However, the judging panel has decided that this achievement transcends our normal award categories. For the first time in the Academy's history, we are creating a new honor. Jake Morrison will receive the Paradigm Shift Award for Technology. That fundamentally changes how we think about warfare. The applause grew louder. Several military observers stood and clapped. Even Jake's classmates, despite their disappointment, seemed genuinely impressed by his achievement. As Jake walked to the center of the hall to accept his award, He noticed something remarkable happening in the audience. Military representatives were not just applauding politely. They were having urgent conversations with their aides and speaking rapidly into communication devices. Some had already left their seats and were heading toward him. "Jake," Professor Colfax said quietly as he handed over the crystalline award, "I think you should prepare yourself for what happens next. You have started something that will not stop with this ceremony." The professor was right. Before Jake could even return to his seat, he was surrounded by military officials from across the galaxy. A reptilian admiral wanted to discuss immediate production contracts. A synthetic collective representative offered him a position leading their weapons development program. Voidborn commanders spoke of outfitting entire battle fleets with his technology. "Please, everyone," Jake said, feeling overwhelmed by the attention. "I need time to think about all of this." But the request kept coming. Within hours of his demonstration, the Human Colonial Defense Force received formal inquiries from over 30 different military organizations. The small Earth government, which had sent Jake to the Academy as a minor diplomatic gesture, suddenly found itself at the center of galactic military affairs. Dr. Helen Carter arrived at the Academy 3 days later with a team of Earth's top military and diplomatic officials. Jake met her in the same library where he had first conceived his idea for the adaptive device. "Jake, do you understand what you have done?" she asked, sitting across from him at the same table where he had spent weeks researching. "I've built a tool that can adapt to different situations," he replied, "the same way humans have always built tools." Dr. Carter smiled. "You have done much more than that. Every major military force in the galaxy wants your technology. The economic implications alone are staggering. But there are other consequences you may not have considered." She was right. Over the following weeks, Jake began to see how his invention was changing things beyond military applications. Civilian organizations wanted adaptive tools for exploration, construction, emergency response, and scientific research. The device's medical configurations could revolutionize healthcare for species that lived in environments too dangerous for traditional medical equipment. But perhaps the most significant change was how other species began to view humanity. For centuries, humans had been seen as a primitive species with crude technology and simple approaches to complex problems. Jake's device proved that sometimes simple approaches were exactly what complex problems needed. Professor Colfax requested a private meeting with Jake 2 weeks after the demonstration. They met in the professor's office, surrounded by holographic displays showing weapons from across galactic history. "Jake, I've been teaching weapons theory for over 300 years," the ancient being said. "I have seen every type of destructive device that intelligent minds can conceive. But you have shown me something I never considered." "What is that, Professor?" "That innovation is not always about making things more powerful or more complex," Colfax replied. "Sometimes it is about making them more useful." The professor's patterns showed contemplation, and a hint of what Jake had learned was embarrassment. "I have been teaching my students to think like warriors when I should have been teaching them to think like problem solvers." Over the following months, Jake worked with Professor Colfax to develop a new curriculum for the Academy. Instead of focusing only on weapons design, students would learn adaptive thinking, multifunction engineering, and the human philosophy of making tools that could solve many different problems. Jake's former classmates became some of his most enthusiastic supporters. Veltar redesigned his bioweapon to serve as both a defensive system and a medical treatment device. Luna modified her electromagnetic pulse device to function as a communication relay and power distribution system. Other students found ways to make their specialized weapons more versatile and useful, but the real test of Jake's invention came 6 months later when the Outer Rim colonies faced a crisis that no one had anticipated. A natural disaster had struck the mining world of New Kepler, causing massive earthquakes and volcanic eruptions that trapped thousands of workers. Underground, traditional rescue operations would have required dozens of different types of equipment: plasma cutters to break through collapsed tunnels, medical scanners to locate survivors, communication devices to coordinate rescue efforts, life support systems to keep workers alive, and construction tools to build temporary shelters. Instead, the rescue teams were equipped with production versions of Jake's adaptive device, a single tool that could become whatever the situation required. Rescue workers could cut through debris, scan for survivors, communicate with trapped workers, provide emergency medical treatment, and build support structures using the same device. The rescue operation was completed in half the time that traditional methods would have required. More importantly, the adaptive tools saved lives by giving rescue workers exactly the right capabilities for each emergency they encountered. News of the successful rescue operation spread throughout the galaxy. Orders for Jake's device came from civilian organizations, scientific expeditions, construction companies, and exploration fleets. The simple tool that had started as a classroom project was becoming the standard equipment for anyone who needed versatile, reliable technology. Jake returned to Earth a year after his Academy demonstration, but he was not the same person who had left. He had become a symbol of human ingenuity and the power of thinking differently about old problems. Dr. Carter met him at the spaceport on Luna, Earth's moon base that served as humanity's primary connection to galactic civilization. As they watched ships from dozens of different species arriving and departing, she asked him what he planned to do next. "I want to continue developing adaptive technology," Jake replied. "But I also want to teach others how to think about problems the way humans do. Professor Colfax has offered me a permanent position at the Academy, and you are considering it?" Jake nodded. The galaxy has amazing technologies and brilliant minds, but sometimes they get so focused on specialization that they forget about adaptation. I think I can help with that. As their shuttle prepared to depart for Earth, Jake looked out at the stars and thought about how much had changed. A year ago, humans had been seen as a minor species with primitive technology. Now, human engineering principles were being studied and adopted throughout the galaxy. But perhaps the most important change was not in how other species viewed humanity, but in how they approached problems. Jake's simple adaptive tool had shown that sometimes the best solution was not the most powerful or most complex one. Sometimes it was the most useful one. The device in Jake's pocket pulsed gently with warm light, as if it sensed his thoughts. It had become more than just a tool or a weapon. It had become proof that human ingenuity could change the galaxy, one simple idea at a time. As Earth grew larger in the shuttle's viewport, Jake smiled. He had left home as a student trying to build a new weapon. He was returning as the creator of something much more important. A new way of thinking about what tools could be. The revolution had begun with a simple metal cylinder and a human idea about adaptation. Now it was spreading across the galaxy, one adaptive solution at a time.